I am now recording the meeting. Gosman, you're muted. There you go.
Oh, I forgot that I was muted. I was already. So I was saying that we have, I think, two participants now. Do we at this point still wait for 5 minutes, or do we see if we can get more participants and then join and then begin the session?
Well, we have 15 participants now.
Yeah.
16.
Um, oh, really?
16.
I did not see that. I did not see that. Okay. Interesting. So I think we can start, and then as time progresses, others can join us. Can we? Okay. Priscilla, for some reason, I can't see Priscilla anymore.
Oh no? Can you hear me?
Oh, I see you now. Okay, so we can start. Okay. Good day, everyone. Is it my network? Can you hear me? Oh yeah, I can see you now. Oh, good. Okay, this is nice. Okay, good day, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you all. My name is Dr. Ngozi Madrafo, but you can feel free to refer to me as Dr. Madrafo. So today's session, I'll be facilitating today's session to guide our discussions and to ensure that we are on track. This will be an interactive session. I would encourage participation. I will encourage questions and shared reflections throughout the discussion. Please, if you have any question while any of the speakers are discussing, you can just drop the questions in the chat box so you do not forget. You can also write it down somewhere in a paper or something. So by the end of this session, I hope that we can have a clearer understanding of how legal education and justice can have a clear understanding of the intersection between legal education and justice. I'm going to begin with introducing the speakers. First, permit me to introduce Professor Richard Roy. Professor Richard I'm just going to read a brief citation of Professor Richard. Professor Richard is a professor of law at Georgetown University Law Center. He's also a Fulbright scholar. He's an internationally recognized leader in justice education and experiential legal training, of course, which is the basis of justice education. For more than 3 decades, Professor Richard has directed Georgetown's street law program. He pioneered innovative and interactive approaches to legal and civic education that empowers learners to understand and engage with the law. He also founded Georgetown's Literacy and Law Seminar, exploring the relationship between literacy development and legal culture. Professor Richard has taught, trained, and consulted extensively across the globe, including Brazil, India, Philippines, Cambodia, Turkey, United Kingdom, even Nigeria, and so on and so forth. His work has contributed significantly to the advancement of clinical legal education, faculty development, and justice education initiatives globally. Although he retired full-time teaching in 2018, he remains actively engaged in promoting learner-centered education and expanding access to justice through legal education. Thank you, Professor Richard, for your time today. So before Professor Richard starts his discussion, let me quickly also introduce the other speaker, that is Dr. Priscilla Joka. Dr. Priscilla Joka is an assistant professor at Lincoln Alexandra School of Law. That is Toronto Metropolitan University, Canada. She is an internationally recognized scholar whose work lies at the intersection of indigenous law, environmental law, human rights, and legal pluralism. Her research focuses on indigenous rights, self-determination, free, prior, and informed consent, water justice, environmental justice, and comparative approaches to territorial governance in Brazil and Canada. She is currently leading and collaborating on several research projects, examining water equity, indigenous legal orders, and democratic innovations involving indigenous peoples and traditional communities. Dr. Joka is a strong advocate for justice-oriented legal education. She began her legal journey through a student-led human rights legal clinic in Brazil and has spent more than 2 decades connecting legal education with access to justice, women's rights, children's rights, territorial rights, and the empowerment of marginalized communities. She has coordinated human rights clinics, working directly with survivors of violence, and continues to engage in collaborative research developed alongside indigenous scholars and communities. I am particularly delighted to welcome Dr. Priscilla Joka to share insights with us today. Thank you very much to both Professor Richard and Dr. Priscilla Joka. So we're going to start this afternoon with Professor Richard. But before we begin with our questions directed at Professor Richard, perhaps we want to hear an opening remarks from him if he has anything to say. Just very briefly, Prof. Prof, you are muted. Prof, you're muted.
So, do you want that I start or Professor Richard Brook?
Professor Richard, I think he's muted.
I'm ready.
Okay, yes. So I was saying before I, ask my first question, if you have anything you would like to say before my first question. Good. So, okay, thank you very much. So I'll go to my first question, which is directed to Professor Richard. So what inspired the creation and expansion of the street law program, and how was it evolved over the years? I mean, before the street law program, there were other clinics in Georgetown, but what led you to ensure that the street law program was distinctively institutionalized in Georgetown Law Center?
Yes. Thank you, Migazi, and welcome to everyone. I joined the street law clinic in 1980, and at that time, clinical legal education was just beginning. Georgetown University Law Center was a pioneer in the creation of clinical education. But they only had very basic clinics, a clinic to represent juveniles, to represent criminal defenders, to do appellate work. Very simple. But it was the beginning of change of legal education, of moving away from the straight lecture or the so-called Socratic method, which I suffered through for my 3 years of law school. And but why did street law get created? To do something different than representation. And the answer to that was the professor who was involved, a man named Jason Newman, who just turned 87 the other day. He had this idea of educating citizens in the law. And so he asked for permission, found a donor who created the program, and began in that way. And the idea was to, instead of having law students learn about the law by just practicing, they could learn about the law by teaching it to other people. The biggest innovation in street law was to shift from teaching by telling to learning by doing. And one innovation that I brought was when I originally joined, the faculty of street law were teaching their students in kind of lecture way. So we switched all of our instruction to our own law students to interactive teaching, activity-based teaching. And that's principally what my work has been for the last 40 years, is teaching interactively, unlike what I'm doing right now. So that's the innovation, but as you may know, it's spread all over the world, principally through an organization called Global Alliance for Justice Education, or GAGE, that has a conference every 2 years. That's where I met Ghazi, uh, uh, Dr. Madara, for last summer. So now you pass the question on to someone else or continue as you like.
Thank you, Prof. So let me go to Dr. Priscilla. I think I should, let's address Dr. Priscilla, then after Dr. Priscilla, I come back to you. Is that okay, Prof? Okay. Okay, so this question is for Dr. Priscilla. Looking back on your journey, what experiences were most transformative in shaping your commitment to justice?
Thank you very much for the question, and also thank you so much for the invitation. Can you hear me well? Yeah? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. I am very glad and honored to be here with Professor Richard Rowe and Dr. Madwafor. I am from Brazil originally. I've been living in Canada since 2013. And I would say that I am the outcome of clinic legal education. When I was in law school many years ago, I participated in a project which was student-led that used to do exactly what Professor Rowe was describing. The name of the project was Cashew, like the fruit. And there we had opportunity to work on street legal education with social movements such as the landless, workers, also working with families involved with, let's say, recovering from kind of very exploitive rural works. Also, you worked with youth and children, and because of the participation in this project, I had the experience of living what Dr. Rowe described, learning by doing and living and receiving the gift of embodied knowledge from many communities and social movements about what the struggle for justice means. And because of this project, I'd say that I've lived two particular moments that really made me decide to continue to pursue the same kind of path as a researcher and a professor. When I was still a student, I was working at a human rights clinic, and I was following during my internship as a law student, I was following a case of a child who suffered from a very rare and particular kind of disease. And the Brazilian state at the time wasn't providing all the health that was needed for her, because according to the state at the time, the cost to give her all the health assistance she needed was much expensive than providing health assistance for, let's say, hundreds of children. So because of this case, under the supervision of the lawyer and also other professionals, we also successfully created a network that could provide the health assistance not only for this child, but also creating a kind of political public policy for assistance for children facing the same kind of challenge. And I received a letter from her before she departed. Like, unfortunately, she passed away. And in the letter, she drew and said, "I miss you, and please don't give up." And I still keep this letter with me from many, many years ago. It helps me to remind how powerful is the law in action, how powerful justice, the fight and struggle for justice is, especially when it is embodied in one person or a group of people and communities and collectivities. The second and last moment, when I was a master LLM student doing my research on territorial rights, I was following a case of a traditional fishing community who was suffering from many kinds of environmental conflicts. And I was having many dialogues with them, trying to come up with a kind of research action that could help them. So then an elder fisherman looked at the sea, and he told me, "You need to understand that it's not only about us. The sea is angry. And everything will be better when the sea calms down." And I never forgot this. I have the video, and also he unfortunately passed away. He was a very elder person, but I never forgot it. Sometimes I still watch the video. That's just for my personal archive, for sure. I couldn't share in respect of him and his family. But again, it reminds me that it is about individuals, people, communities, and also about other beings than human who shared the effects of injustice in practice, I'd say.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let me quickly go back to Professor Richard. You mentioned when you were discussing the inspiration behind the street law program, you mentioned for you it was law by teaching, it was telling by learning, students, and then learning by doing. Here, we still have, legal education very entrenched in doctrinal teaching. So how, in your opinion, how can legal educators balance doctrinal teaching with experiential and participatory learning approaches?
Sure. That's an important question. And I think the answer involves simply showing people how to do it, and that it's possible to do. And one connection that Dr. Joka and I have is that my two Fulbrights were in Brazil. So falo Português, and I actually helped start a version of street law in Brazil at a university, and I worked at it from several angles. First, let me tell you that in the United States, we spread street law from high schools to prisons. We had two separate clinics, street law in high school, street law in prisons. They really worked about the same. And there was one moment in prison that I remember where the law students taught in these interactive ways. So the prisoners were doing activities. They weren't just learning, lecturing. We wanted them to think for themselves and to think civically and legally. So one prisoner was getting released, and he asked the law student for a letter of recommendation. And I coached the law student to do it and to say in a very matter of fact way, what the person accomplished in the class. So very simple. He came to class, he participated, he talked, and she wrote the letter, gave it to the prisoner. The prisoner excused himself from the class, read the letter, excused himself from the class, went to another room, came back 5 minutes later, and his face was wet with tears. And he said, "That was the nicest thing anyone ever said about me." And it was something ordinary. And to think of these men and women in prison who were suffering. So we expanded street law from just working in the law school to actually going out into the community. We had programs teaching families how to read with their children. We taught men and women prisoners how to read with their children and arranged for family visits. And when I went to Brazil, we we of course did another thing. I conducted a street law class where the law students taught in fourth grade to young children, all interactively, wonderful activities. The kids were doing skits. I've videos of these; they're fabulous. And then in high schools, and we pioneered a major way of teaching is using mock trials, because mock trials can crystallize legal thinking. And of course, they're highly participatory because the students play lawyers and witnesses in these cases, and they're very good. But we also did work in the community at a place called Profas, outside of Sao Paulo, where I taught at Mackenzie Presbyterian University. And the other thing that I did there was to do teacher training for the professors themselves as part of their development. Mackenzie had a program. So, and I did it not only in Mackenzie, but elsewhere in Brazil. So all of these approaches showed the versatility of the materials. And unlike what I'm doing now, it's telling you, but let me tell you one other thing. How did I get into learner-centered teaching? When I was in college, I took a year abroad in Bogota, Colombia. And I was asked by my professor there, would I be interested in teaching? A job opened up in a elementary school in Colombia. Would I go? And I would try. So I went, I interviewed, the teacher quit, and it was for 3 hours every day in the morning. And they were doing reading, history, and some I can't and another part. And so I said, sure, I'll do it. When do I start? He says, here are the books right now. Go in the room. I went into the room, and there are 22 children. I said, well, what are you doing? Well, we're reading a story in the book. Here's a book. And they opened up all their books, and it was called Billy's Big Muscle. Your big Billy's Big Muscle. So we're just reading a couple of sentences and taking turns around the room. So they're taking turns reading, and they're reading very well, pronouncing the English perfectly. But then there's a boy in the class whose name happened to be Billy, Guillermo. His mother was American, so he was fluent in English. He raised his hand after about 15, 20 minutes of reading. He raises his hand and says, Mr. Rowe, what does muscle mean? What does muscle mean? They were reading all of these words and pronouncing them without understanding anything. The learning was passing by them. It was all mechanical. And that motivated me to change my teaching so that the students would read for understanding instead of and that began my process, which is still going on. And that's why in the prisons we shifted our program also to teach the prisoners how to read with their children. And that again was giving them something valuable to do. We got grant money to bring the families to the prison. It was very powerful, and I still continue to do that work. So it's a way of figuring out to spread this is to give people experience. And actually, Professor Madhura Floor and I are going to Edinburgh, Scotland, to do a presentation at. There's two international conferences combined there, the European Network for Clinical Education and the International Journal for Clinical Legal Education, and we'll do an interactive session. You can even do that on Zoom. Like, we could break into groups. We have the breakout rooms. We could have a discussion that way. I hope that answers.
Yes, I think in the next session we can try to arrange to have breakout sessions. The next series of justice education, we can arrange that. But yes, thank you, Prof. Before we proceed to the next, I want to ask a question to the general audience. When you think about, please, you can drop your response in the chat box. Drop your response in the chat box. I will also, state the question again in the chat box. When you think about access to justice education, when you think about access to justice, when access to justice comes to your mind, what do you think is the barrier in your current jurisdiction, wherever you are in your jurisdiction, your context? What do you think is the barrier to access to justice? Thank you. So let me go to Dr. Priscilla. You mentioned that one of your experience, one of the transformative experience for you was the fact that you realized how powerful the law is in action. Then this leads me to this question. How can environmental law be used as a tool for social justice rather than just environmental regulation?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. I think this is a very also the question per se, I think, is very insightful, and you could spend many time, I think, talking about not only environmental law, but law per se. Is law a tool for social justice, or is law a tool for practicing some kind of oppressions and violence? Understand that, at least from a Western centric perspective, the law has also been mobilized and instrumentalized as a way of practicing injustice. But I think beyond this dichotomy or this way of thinking of contraries, is law fair or not fair, just or unjust? There is the experience in law in action, as Dr. Rowe was describing. Environmental law becomes a tool for social justice first when we understand environmental law beyond state regulations, when we understand environmental law from a social ecological perspective, along with the understanding of human rights, understanding that it is impossible to have access to a healthy environment and a healthy climate without a social, economic, racial, and gender-based justice too. So these layers, or maybe these aspects of justice, they are all intertwined among them. So if you understand, if you have these lenses, and this is, I think, a very good start. And to build up these lenses, we need to have hands-on way of learning this. Indigenous peoples, local traditional communities, populations from the most affected climate crisis, and many other collectivities, they have already or embodied or understood this interconnection. But for many law students who grew up in more urban settings without deep thinking about ecological aspects of all this, this is a very, let's say, theoretical or very disembodied way of thinking about the environment, or they think about the environment as far from them, like protecting the forest, protecting the animals, or they don't think at all. So through hands-on activities, through thinking about environmental justice, studying a case of environmental injustice, understanding how they themselves, they are part of environments and their bodies and the families that they belong to, the communities, if they come from more marginalized and racialized communities, they also suffer from environmental injustice in the city. So this is a very powerful way of learning by doing. And finally, I'd say that understanding also law beyond this contrary or being just or unjust, including environmental law as one of the fields of law. I have also learned that law in action is always in dispute, in conflict, and in negotiation. So, for instance, when you think about social movements, as the landless workers or indigenous people social movements, transnationally organized in Canada or Brazil, Nigeria, or elsewhere, US, they have a negotiated relationship with the state law. So it's not only giving up the state law and say this is so unfair, but also understand critically the gaps, the conundrums, the contradictions, understanding that the law will be interpreted from different lenses depending on the standing point, depending on the actor, if it is the state, the government, if it is a big company, if it is people trying to protect a park or a protected area without considering the indigenous people, the community who live there, if it is the community per se. So we have different stakeholders, right holders, and actors who will be in this dispute. And the social movements, they have, I have learned from them that actually sometimes they know how to navigate it even better than us, who learn law from the law school, and they are all the time building legal and political strategies to build up law as justice, to mobilize law as justice.
Thank you very much. So I think we have some responses in the chat on yes, we have Fatima. She says one of the barriers to access to justice is high cost of legal services. Many people cannot afford lawyers, court fees, or other legal expenses, which is one of the rationale for the institutionalization of CLE, particularly in Nigeria, to aid in the service of free legal services to indigent members of the society. We also have from Professor Richard, barriers to access to justice, realizing that the goal of education and law is to empower engagement in the world, which involves thinking and acting for oneself in an interdependent world. And this leads me to my question on literacy and law to Professor Richard. Your seminar, Literacy and Law, explores the relationship between literacy and legal culture. Why is literacy fundamental to access to justice, in view of the fact that it's not just to adults, but also to high school students, to pupils? So why is it fundamental to access to justice?
Thank you, Gazi. That's a good question. And part of it came out of my own experience of, first of all, being a parent and also remembering being a child and having a love for books and that connection. So as I spread the work of street law into the families who were incarcerated and tried to, through this family literacy program, give them the experience of being being families and reading with their children in the prisons and in homeless settings, which we also worked in DC. I got involved in reading children's books. And it turns out many children's books have extraordinary legal messages in them. I can't give you the details of this now, but there's one book, for example, just one, called Max's Chocolate Chicken. You think, wow, Max's Chocolate Chicken, what could that be about? But it actually has a very powerful legal message in it. And I'll won't go into that story, but it's an example. So I created a course 28 years ago where we brought the law students in and we we developed thinking around this. And we had them actually not only attend an interactive class, where at the end we would always read a children's book and analyze it from legal perspectives. And there are many of them that have that. But we also had them read as part of the course with emergent readers. Emergent readers being a person who's developing their reading skills. And the reason I picked emergent readers is I wanted the law students in the short period of a semester to have the experience of improvement, to have the experience of seeing how people's minds and ideas and change through reading. And they keep a monthly journal. It's just a 3-month course, so they have a monthly journal of 5 pages. And for a final paper, they have a choice. They can write a conventional 10-page paper, or they can write a children's book, and they write an explanatory essay. And I have over 400 children's books written by law students, some of which are absolutely brilliant. And they show how the law can be expressed in simple terms that are understandable. And they involve all of the values that we're talking about today. So it's a fun course to teach. I teach it interactively. And I'll tell you one thing we do. My youngest son was a teacher of gymnastics for a while for very young children. And they would have birthday parties on the weekends, and parents would sign up, bring a whole group of children to the gymnastics place to learn gymnastics. And the important thing was for the kids to be safe and to know how to use the material, use the apparatus, and pay attention and focus. So my son says, well, but Nagazi, Dr. Metaphor, you're the birthday girl today. It's your birthday. If you could be one animal, it's not her birthday today, but just if you could be an animal, what animal would you be? And she'd say, I'd be whatever. And Priscilla, you're good friends with Dr. Maroff, with Nagasi. If you could be an animal, what would you be? And you would say an animal. So, okay, well, everybody stand up. We're going to be the animal that Ghazi said. And then walk around the room in the classroom at Georgetown Law School being these animals, pretending to be animals. And then Priscilla, they'd all follow around the room being Priscilla's animal, making the animal noises and whatever they were doing, right? And we do that for a few minutes. And then I tell them that's what my son Chris does. But then he does a strange thing. He doesn't tell the kids the rules. That he said the rules are very important, but he doesn't tell them the rules. Why not? The answer is they all showed they could follow the rules and pay attention, follow each other around, play together, do it in a sensible way. They already knew how to do the rules. He didn't have to give them a lecture. He had to have them experience that they could do it. So if a child was getting out of line, he would say, remember the animals. We have to follow the rules. So it's bringing the the experience into the hands of the learners. And so
Thank you. Bringing the experience into the hands of the learners. Thank you, Prof. Okay, back to Dr. Priscilla. I have just two more questions for you. If you could reform one aspect of legal education to strengthen outcomes of justice, what would it be and why?
I think it's very inspired by Dr. Rowe. I think it's exactly what he said, is putting the experience on the hands of learners and believing learners. There is one Brazilian educator, Paulo Freire, that I believe, yeah, Dr. Rowe knows very well. I believe many of you have at least heard about him. And as one of the founders of popular education, he always reminded education as a field that learners know how to learn even better than the professors, educators, and teachers. So I think this is a very important reminding. Also, thinking of a more institutional way of reforming or transforming legal education. I'd love to see a law school in which this kind of experience were mandatory in a very, let's say, broad way. We have a clinic, a legal clinic at Lincoln Alexander Law School. Lincoln Alexander Law School also has what we call IPC, Integrated Practice Curriculum. So all lectures, they are followed with a kind of very practical and hands-on activity. But still, this is very close to law as institutional and also justice system oriented. I think the kind of practice that Dr. Rowe was describing, and myself and Gazi, you two are inspiring us with your questions, is looking at the institutional portion of law, but also going beyond. So, for instance, in the environmental law course we teach, the students, they are invited to do field works activity in which in group they are going to visit a place that in Toronto is very important for them, and then they have to do environmental justice lenses police brief about that place. But the first thing is understanding who they are. And I think this kind of education also help to bring to law reflexivity as a legal pedagogical practice, understanding how they position themselves, what are they socioeconomic, political privilege, or what are the kind of socioeconomic, political, racial, and gender-based struggles, how everything is intersectional and intertwined, and what kind of lawyers they want to become, and what are the roles they want to play in order to really build up justice, thinking of commitment to build reciprocity with larger society. I think this is very important. And this kind of reflexivity is more powerful when a student goes to, as it was the case in past course, when a group of students, they come to a marginalized neighborhood in Toronto where they never been, and they discover much life there, and they discover that there are many community gardenings, and there are many first generation migrant people struggling there, but also taking care of the neighborhood and building community. And in building community, they are also taking care of the parks, taking care of the green areas. So when they came back and they presented to the larger class, talking about how surprised they were and how this kind of experience can be transformative because reflexive, and how they will carry it with then in their becoming lawyers, I think this is very powerful. So if we could spread this kind of pedagogy and approach in legal education, I think it could be already a very transformative move.
Of course. Thank you very much. Of course. Back to Professor Richard. I've omitted, stating that Professor Richard is also a facilitator of a mindfulness session. During the GAGE sessions, he usually conducts the mindfulness session. Even when we had the Clinical Legal Education Colloquium conference here in Nigeria last year, he was here, for the conference, and he also facilitated a mindfulness session. Now, here's my question for Prof. As a facilitator of mindfulness programs for lawyers and even law students, why is well-being important in legal education and legal practice?
Well, that's an interesting question. For me, mindfulness began at Georgetown with actually in the medical school, where the a professor there, saw that the doctors to be, the medical students, and the patients, were all under a lot of stress. And he did research to see which was the best way to reduce stress. And it turned out that mindfulness meditation was the best way. So the medical school created a program called Mind Body Medicine, which taught mindfulness meditation, not instructionally, but by actually doing it and practicing it in various ways in an hour or two a night for a couple of weeks. And they passed that along to the law school. We changed the name, called it Lawyers in Balance. And it's a way of becoming in touch with oneself. And it's a good way to practice. And I not instructed it because it wasn't teaching by the principles of meditation. It was simply doing it with people every day and not over analyzing it, just getting into the mood, the experience of it. And I started doing that in these international conferences in the mornings. I did a professional presentation about it. But now what I do for 20 minutes in the morning before the conference is we'll hold meditations and I'll read a mindfulness meditation. People will do it, and it just sets us up for our day. But I think it's important too because it's become centering. And so it's balancing one's own centeredness with a world that is centered. I think environmental education, by the way, is extremely powerful and a metaphor for any kind of law. And in fact, we're going to do a case. Does anybody know? There's a famous American case which talks about whether it's called the Sierra Club versus Morton, and it's a case. Does the Sierra Club have standing to represent nature? Who will represent nature if nature can't speak for itself? Very important questions. So, but again, and I love what Dr. Joka is talking about with the experience of environmental work, that we are engaged in the world and the way our communities feel. These are enduring. And it's a real concern today with enormous amounts of money going into electricity and for the data centers. There are all kinds of questions around there. But the way to help people answer them is not by just policy arguments, but by experiencing one's daily world. So that's why I think there's a connection between mindfulness and practice of law.
Thank you, Prof. So back to Priscilla, and this is my last question before we begin to entertain questions from the audience. Just like you, I am actually also a product of justice education, clinical legal education. I was the group leader of pretrial detention in my alma mater, that's Adekunle Ajasin University. So I also, yes, went to the prison and also led my fellow students to the prison to, help offer legal aid services to indigent detainees. And that was at Ondo State, Olokuta Prison. So what advice would you give to law students who aspire to build careers focused on social justice and community empowerment?
Thank you so much for sharing with us your experience, Kazi, and also this question is again a very beautiful question. I will be thinking about this for at least few days. Thank you very much. I can share, I think, what inspired me. When I started learning law through the kind of human rights clinical education I was describing, the first thing I learned was to unlearn, because the kind of theoretical knowledge we have about law doesn't necessarily translate what we find in our hands-on experiencing and embodied learning. So I learn to unlearn. The second thing this experience have been teaching me is learning how to listen to. And listening actively, it's not only listening and not talking, it's listening with deep attention and be mindful, as Dr. Ro was describing, and also engaging in a mindful way with the person or the community we are engaging with. And lastly, I'd say is learning to be humble. It is wonderful the way that we become more open to unlearn, to listen to engage with, to build with, when we learn to be humble. And humble is not about giving up our courage to change. The contrary. Being humble is also being conscious of our role and be conscious of our power to become part of empowered communities to struggle and fight for change. But being humble is also understand how much we don't know, how much we need to unlearn, and how much we need to learn without others, and understanding that one person is essential, but one person is never enough. So we need to be in community or in communities in order to become the kind of social justice lawyers that you want to be, and learning to learn, learning to actively listen to and engage with, learning to be humble, for me is a lifelong learning process. And I also believe that at least by trying to learn as a professor, I am already calling the students to also learn it with me.
Thank you very much. Our time is fast spent. We were supposed to end the session by 2 p.m. and it's fast spent. But I would quickly round up with Professor Richard. My question is, before we leave, what message would you like to leave with young lawyers, with justice advocates, educators? I mean, we have some law lecturers here also. So what message would you like to leave with them, to commit to expanding access to justice and justice education? Thank you.
Well, I would simply reiterate what Dr. Joka is saying, is to be a constant learner and to have humility and interconnectedness with the people we work with and the world. So And, it's back to the idea, we the people. The law is for everyone. And we are all worthy of living a good life, whatever that means. But there's the old spiritual song, you take what you need, but don't take too much. And to realize that we can live in a world in which everybody and everything can sustain itself. And the world is actually under a threat of imbalance now. And we need all of our civic and legal powers to bring it into balance once again.
Thank you very much, Prof. Before we round up, I think we have a response here again as regards barriers to access to justice. Someone here says delay in administration of justice, lengthy court proceedings. That is Aisha Mohammed Babakura. Says delay in the administration of justice is a barrier to access to justice. Lengthy court proceedings and frequent adjournment discourage many people from seeking legal remedies and can deny timely justice. We have from Grace, linking clinical law to environmental justice. We help safeguard the future. I agree 100% with both Aisha and Grace. So just as a way of conclusion, I just want the students here to know that justice education, being committed to it, does not mean that there will not be some sort of remuneration at the end of the day for you. It's a career that is actually very prospective. It's a career that is actually very rewarding. Even financially, it can eventually be rewarding. When I was reading Professor Richard's citation and Dr. Priscilla's citation, maybe some people were not here. From the citation I read out, you would see that from the works that they have done, one way or the other, they must have been very well financially remunerated. So yes, even though it's basically on legal education and basically on offering free legal services, it doesn't mean that you will still not have access to be compensated financially very well. So thank you very much to everyone. And like I said earlier, I just want to make this point clearly. When I was saying, just like Dr. Priscilla, I was also a product of clinical legal education. And for me, another thing I think we should leave this session with is, for me, this is Nigeria, right? I'm in Nigeria as we speak. And I've been with Nile University. I lecture in Nile University, and I've been with Nile University for 10 years now. And if we understand, for those that are in Nigerians, you understand that once you are out of school, once you're a graduate, the labor market can be crazy. So for some people that are not that lucky or whatever, they may be out there in the labor market for 5 years before they get a job. I mean, my point is, it is not easy getting a job after you become a graduate. But justice education can also be a key to giving you an edge, to giving you an advantage. For me personally, while I was doing my youth service, the National Youth Service, before I finished my youth service, I already got an offer from the Deputy Vice Chancellor. That was in 2017 March. I was to end my youth service in 2017 September, and in 2017 March, months before I was to end my youth service, I already had a job waiting for me. I just needed to confirm acceptance of the job. So this is a very lucrative career that you just need to focus. And just like you heard Professor Richard and Dr. Priscilla, you just have to keep learning and be humble in the process. For example, me, I'm still a student. I keep learning all the time. I always want to listen. And I always tell my students, thank God most of them are here. I love when Dr. Priscilla talked about listening. Active listening is very important. I mean, it's very important. It's key. So yes, so humility, and we should keep learning. is something, is a virtue that we should hold on to in Justice Education. Thank you very much, everyone. I do not think do we have any question, or do we have any? I don't think we have any question. And Professor Richard, thank you. For the next session, we'll try to make it much more interactive. Try to have breakout sessions. I know you do not like this style. This is not Professor Richard's style. His style is he likes interactive session. He wants to communicate. He wants to listen to you speak. Then he will give his response after he has heard you speak. So I actually ambushed him into this kind of arrangement. This is not his kind of arrangement. So thank you, Professor Richard, and thank you, Dr. Priscilla Ajoka. I'm very honored that you accepted my invitation to be part of this session today. So thank you to everyone. And with this, having said this, I think I'm going to end the session. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye, Ma.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye, Priscilla.
Bye. It was really a pleasure. I feel.
Priscilla, please keep in touch.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to send an email to you both. And to be honest with you all, I become a little bit more smart after learning from you two. So you both. Thank you very much, Professor Erbo. And thank you, Professor Ngazi. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks to everyone. Thanks to everyone for participating. I hope we can meet again soon.
Thank you. Me too. And please invite me for the interactive session with Dr. Richard Rowe. Yes. Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Até logo, passe bem.
Até logo. Você também. Obrigada.
Thank you again, Dr. Mello.
Yes, please. I hope this video, it can be saved, right?
I'll find it and send it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Prof. You've been so